what is FAST and how does it work?
It stands for Family Advice Support Text and Telephone Line. And that really gives the clue to what it is. It's a text and telephone service for families of neurodiverse children to get tips on building skills or behavioral topics for their child. It's a partnership between Undivided and the University of Oregon. I work at the University of Oregon. I'm a research assistant professor, and we work on child development programs and research on child development.
And why did you start FAST? What was the need that you were seeing from families?
We were talking to a lot of families, working with families in different contexts. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that, raising a child can be challenging. Any child, and especially raising a child that's neurodiverse, can have its own challenges. And parents had other services available to them, like occupational therapy, speech and language, autism specialists, for example. But those were more structured services, something you would make an appointment for, or you would go to an office or a clinic, or sometimes they would come to your home, but it was more structured. And we were seeing, and this especially was prominent during the pandemic, when parents had very limited availability to go out to places or have people come into their homes. They needed a more flexible way of getting tips and strategies that they could be working on. And so that's why we started FAST, so that we could offer something that was text-based, very flexible. You can text in, get the tips you need. You can pause conversations. You can read them when you have time. It just seemed like a more accessible way to get some help.
One of the silver linings of the pandemic, I guess, right? We were forced to sort of, break out of the comfort zone, but also discovered, right, that there are other ways that we can get help. But I do want to talk specifically about how FAST works. But first, I think that it's important to talk about the principles in which it's rooted. So it is strength-based, child-centered, and evidence-based. So which are all beautiful words, that parents want to hear. So, but if you could tell us about that and how that really does root what you're doing.
Yeah, let's walk through those. FAST is strength-based, and that means that we focus our perspective on the strengths of the child and build on those. Now, people use the term strength-based a number of different ways, but for us, what that means is we're not so much looking, it's not a deficit-based focus. We're not looking at what the child can't do. We're taking whatever the skill or the behavior is, flipping it to the thing that we want to build, and then we look to see where is the child at on that skill. And that allows us, and here's the first hint, they're never at a zero. They're always somewhere. They always have some amount of that skill. And that then helps us work with the parent to figure out, okay, what are the steps that are closest to where they're at that we could help support them in building the skill. So that is why we call it a strength-based skill, because it is based on what the child can already do, and then finding the next accessible steps that are able for them to manage to build the skill. The second part is about a child-centered approach. So in this case, we don't just think about behavior and changing behavior. We view, as many others do, we view behavior as a form of communication. It's a way of understanding, what does the child need? What do they want? What is helpful for them in that moment? And sometimes it's more challenging than others. But the idea that it's a communication means then that we aren't just looking to fix a behavior. We're looking at what's the underlying message that's being sent, and can we address that? That is often more helpful. It sometimes means that we're not changing behavior, we're changing things that might trigger a behavior. Or we might think of more acceptable ways for the child to get that need met. Sometimes it means there's a change to the environment or the demands on the child that would help them. So that's what we mean by a child-centered approach as opposed to a behavior approach. And then the last thing is we used evidence-based approaches. So we work at a university, we do research ourselves, and we actually really adhere to using evidence to see what is really working. And that means programs or approaches that have been tested, they have been run in trials to see that they actually work, not just someone's idea of what might work. And we take that very seriously. So we use evidence-based approaches. Now, That said, evidence-based approaches incorporates a wide range of things, and not all of those approaches fit with each child or parent. So part of our job is to understand what are the evidence-based approaches and help find the ones that fit best for that child and that parent.
I love that, because it isn't just about, yep, there's evidence that this works, so we're going to fit your child into this mold. Because a lot of times I know a lot of parents feel like they're going into something and it is about fitting their child into a certain mold, doing something a certain way. And again, that would be the opposite of child-centered. So I love that that is your approach, as it should be the approach in many things that our families face.
Yeah, when we say, is it a fit, it's really a fit for whom? And there are a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah, definitely. And so how does the program work? Like, what can parents expect when they use it?
First of all, this is a research study. So this is a federally funded research study to test, how is this working? And so because of that, there's a consent process. The first thing a parent would do is they'll get a link to a consent where they read through, and that tells them about what the study is. What are we doing? It will talk about things like privacy, confidentiality, and we'll ask them to sign off that they agree for them to be in the study. Then we'll ask them to do some online surveys. And these are pretty short. Like, most parents finish these in, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 minutes. Like, there's some questions about parenting stress, things that are stressful for you as a parent. And then there's some questions about how you view yourself in your role as a parent. And then there's some demographic questions, basic household size, status, things like that. And they'll do the questionnaires. Then they'll get a text sent to their phone, and it will be a welcome text that'll say, hey, welcome to the FAST line. Here's how it works. Text us in when you've got a topic that you want to talk with a specialist about. And when they're ready, they text in and they'll say, oh, I want to talk about this topic. And a support specialist will re-engage with them. The hours of that study or the hours of the service are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific time. So within those hours, they'll get a text back, and the person will say, hey, and they'll ask a few questions about the topic, about their child, and then they'll go back and forth with some strategies. After they finish that, and that can be over a short period of time in a single day, or it might be, if the parent's busy, they might pause and they might pick it up later, next day, 2 days later, a week. There's no set time on when the parent responds. But once they kind of have the strategies, they feel like they are willing to try, then that topic will get closed down, and they'll receive another text in about 2 weeks after they've had time to try it to do a follow-up survey. Same questions like parenting stress, parenting ideas, and some questions about their experience of using the program. So how was it for you? What worked well? Are there things that you think could be better? So that we learn about how the program's working. And then that's really it. That's the program.
So would a parent do the survey after every question that they had? Is it every topic? Or how often are they responding to how those strategies worked for their family?
Yeah, a good question. For the purposes of the research aspect of this, they only do the surveys once. They'll do the pre-survey, then they'll get some strategies, and then they'll do what we call the post-survey after they've finished. They can still text in as many times as they want on other topics. Like, there's no limit on that, and we encourage them to do that. We love that. But we're not going to ask them for surveys for every single topic. And so it's just one time. It's just one time. I'll also say, because I didn't mention it earlier, that as a thank you for taking the time to do these surveys, we'll give them a $25 Amazon gift card for each of the 2 surveys.
That's
so
great.
It's not a ton, but might be helpful for something.
Well, yes, and if you're like some unnamed people that you might be seeing on screen, Amazon might come to your door quite often. So we know that families, every bit counts. Absolutely. And I did have a follow-up question I really love this piece, so I want to make sure that parents hear it, that when you said they can come back to it. So it isn't like, okay, I'm going to text and then maybe and maybe you are, or could you be on a session talking to somebody for an hour, texting back and forth? Or if you're like, I need to like ask this question, but then I'm going to need to go get my, son at school, I'm going to run out. So it might be 5 minutes and you can continue later. I just wanted to follow up on that because I think that's we know how busy parents' lives are. And so that they really know that this is something within those working hours that they can send something to, but it doesn't have to be, I need to set aside an hour for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is totally the way it works. The whole idea of this is that it's flexible, that parents can do it when they've got time. They can text in. Sometimes we'll have a parent who will just engage and they want to do all the questions right at all in a block, and that is fine. But very often, I would say more often, we have parents who will text in. They'll send us some questions. We'll maybe ask them a couple of questions so that we're trying to understand what will work best for them. And then there'll be a pause, and we might get an answer back later that day, or sometimes the next day. Sometimes it's a couple days, sometimes it's a week. There's just no rule for it. And that is fine with us. The whole idea of this is to make it flexible and accessible.
Wonderful. I think it would be great if you could maybe give us an example and walk us through how that could be handled by a FAST support specialist.
When the parent texts in for an issue, and they'll say, I'm working on this issue with my child, and first of all, they'll get a greeting back from a support specialist, an early childhood support specialist. And these specialists are trained in evidence-based approaches and trained in how to do this over text, right? So they will get a text back saying, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm, a support specialist, and I've been assigned to work with you. And they'll ask a few questions usually, because usually the parent will say something like, oh, my child's having some issues with aggression, or my child's having problems with anxiety, or whatever the issue is. The support specialist will start to ask a few questions about the background and what the parents tried, and then they'll sort of establish this rapport. We usually will go through a series of steps that help us understand is there a challenging behavior, and then we'll move that to identify what is the corresponding skill for that behavior. That's the strength-based part. And then we'll do a little check to find out what are some of the specific things for this child. Now, it's not an exhaustive list or history of everything about that child. We're really trying to understand things that are relevant to this particular, whatever the topic is for the parent, and also things that the parent may have tried, and the parent's beliefs about a couple of things. So it'll typically sound like this. I want to help my child with, my child says no all the time to me, and what would I ask? And that would be an example.
I can relate. Just saying. Were you at my house this morning, Dr. Peak? Yes, I can relate.
So we'll say, okay, that's a pretty easy one to flip. We'll say, so what you want to do is build cooperation for your child. Yes. And we'll start to figure out, where's the child at? Like, how often are they cooperating versus not cooperating? What are some of the circumstances where we're finding that they're not cooperating? What might be triggers for those things? What does it look like? Then we'll ask the parent what they've tried so far, and if they have any values around that, like, hey, are there some things that you've tried? Are there particular approaches that you don't want to do? So we'll find some parents who are open to any evidence-based approach, and they're very open about what are the options. Some parents have tried some things and feel like it's not for them and their child, and they want to stay away from them. And that is totally fine with us. That'll help us give them strategies that are a better fit. Let's see. What would be the example? So that in texting, what we'll do is we'll go through with the parent, and we're trying to do this as efficiently as possible through text. And that's not always easy. Texting is not always the simplest way, but we can ask key questions that will give us an idea of those directions relatively quickly. And we'll give the parents some choices. It's almost like playing a game of would you rather, right? Would you rather this or would you rather this? And it's a broad direction. And when the parent answers, we'll say, okay, I see this direction. And then we'll say, okay, let's talk about some strategies in this direction. We'll float a general idea of a strategy. If the parent says, that sounds interesting, then we'll send details on that one. And the details can be lengthy. I'm not going to lie, like they can be lengthy. But a lot of parents tell us that they want the details. They want the details. They just don't want a ton of things that are not relevant to what they're asking. But once we get to what they're asking, they do want the details. We've also heard from parents that having the details in a text is nice because they can go back and refer to it periodically. They can reread it. So they don't just have to listen to it and remember it.
Right.
And that's it. So we'll usually check with the parent after we give the details about how they feel about that strategy. Does it seem to fit with what they're thinking? Do they feel like it's something they could try? And once they say, yep, I think that is, I'm going to try that, then that particular case is done. In about 2 weeks, then they'll get a text that says, hey, do you want to do the follow-up survey?
I think you already answered this, but just to reiterate, so how often can parents text for help? It's unlimited, correct?
Unlimited, yeah.
Right.
I mean, well, while we're running the program, so the program is funded for a set length of time, and I think we're wrapping up in July of 2024, this coming July, and so through that period of time, as much as you want.
And I know families will want to know this. Will they get to speak to the same person every time they text?
Yeah, we try to do that. When the support specialist goes on, there's a way that they can, so to speak, claim that case, and then that just stays with them. And that's helpful because then you don't have to re-explain things. And that's the way we do it. Occasionally, there will be a case where a parent needs an answer right away. And if that support specialist person is not in that day, someone else may step in to give some help. If the parent if it's time sensitive, they'll step in. And the same thing is that if they text back in later on a new topic, we'll try to keep the same support specialist person just to kind of, so you don't have to start over.
Exactly. That's, yeah, again, time is golden for families. And so when you can just sort of take off running with somebody that already has some backstory, that's always helpful. So that's great. And I also wanted to ask, do you suggest that FAST, do you suggest it as a standalone behavior intervention or in addition to what families might already be using?
Definitely in addition. We know that families will often have support services available to them, and those support services, FAST is not a substitute, let's say, for speech and language therapy or occupational therapy or even autism specialists. Like those are in-depth, more intensive therapies, and they're often in person, which is very important. So it's not a replacement for those. This is really about, hey, I need some tips in between, or I need some tips that align with that. And our focus is really on support for building skills especially around behaviors. Like that is our focus. And sometimes those other services include that or some form of that, but we're really focused on it. Now, that said, I think that you can get pretty good guidance from text. Just there's sometimes when a behavior is really intense, right? You're really dealing with something tough. You're gonna want more intensive work on that. The text isn't gonna do it.
It's really a great option as an extra support for parents. And like you said, it's those skills. And so if you're getting any kind of, behavior intervention in whatever form that may be on the regular, we all know that lots of things happen in between, or you might have follow-up questions and you can't access, your child's team, in real time quite often. And so to have an extra gateway to learn those skills for parents, a direct support for parents is just really essential. There's not, I don't think there can be too many, places for parents to go for help. Especially like if it is in that moment, or even in that moment of like, hey, this has been going on, I got to run out the door, but help, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, let's say you're in between visits with one of your specialist support programs. What are the options for a parent? Well, they can go do an internet search. And then there's just like a myriad of things, some of which are great, some of which are not great. There's forums and other groups of parents which are super helpful. Here's been my experience. What we are trying to add to that is a place where there are people who really think about what are evidence-based approaches and really try to think about what will work for that child and that parent.
Right.
And so that's the idea, and to be able to do it flexibly when you may not have time or availability. The other thing I'm hearing from parents is that when they're working on these strategies, sometimes they want to know the answer to something kind of while the behavior is happening, like right, very close to when the behavior is happening. And that just makes it so that they can begin trying things like right then.
Right.
And it's just faster. And you don't have to remember what happened last week. Like it just happened.
And so important. I think it's really exciting when parents can get involved with these research studies, because then they can really give you the feedback of, this worked or this didn't, or, this would be more effective, right? So you guys can really learn from families about, did it work in the moment? Was it better when, you came back a week later, or, getting that feedback, because every family is different. But I love the opportunity for things to be built, obviously with parents, which is, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
And, oh, sorry, did you have something to say, Doctor?
Well, I'll just say that, we're learning through this partnership, we are learning also, and we are adjusting the service to see how it fits better with parents and what they need. I'll say that early on, we began understanding how important it was to understand the parent's experience with different things, because that really guided a lot of the work. And so I think we're now starting to dial in a little bit better on it. Occasionally we're hearing from parents, well, this worked or this didn't work. Plus, one of the clearest things that we are seeing is that you can't just reliably pick any one strategy and know 100% that it's going to work for you and your child in that moment. There's not only are there different circumstances, but there's different timings, developmental timings of the kids. Some things will work at one age and they won't work at another. And so all of the strategies, and this is something we really try to work with parents on, is that you should view them as a test, an experiment. I wonder how this is going to work, and trying it out, and then you'll watch the result. And we'll tell them like, hey, if this is working, here's what you should see. You should see this behavior changing, and you should see this skill changing. And you should see it over the next 2 weeks. So that parents approach this with the idea of testing. And we really love it when parents will give us feedback later to go, hey, that worked, or no, I need a different one.
Yeah. And one of the hard and fast rules that I think parents know to rely on is that what works one day might not work the next, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it does. Well, and on that, I love, obviously this is a passion project for you and your team, and something, again, that anything giving access to parents for more skills and strategies and support is something we get excited about. But I would love, is there anything that you want to say to parents who are struggling, with how to best support their children?
First of all, we talk with a lot of parents, and in the course of that, we also hear about their kids and their circumstances, life circumstances, and the behaviors that they're sometimes dealing with. We hear about what they want for their kids, what their hopes are for the future. And so the first thing I would just say to the parents is that I really wish that the world in general could see what we see, what we see parents doing to support their kids, like the effort, the challenges that they are willing to deal with. Like, I'm impressed by it every day, every day. So first that. Second thing I'll say is that this sounds maybe trite, but to hang in there. And because we are seeing the improvement for kids. I remember a while back, there was, we were doing a group implementation. It was a group of parents, all had neurodiverse kids. And there was one mom who had, I think her child was 3, had just been diagnosed with autism, had some very challenging behaviors. And she was struggling a little, like that was hard. And the newness of it and all the things that she was facing was hard. And there was another mom in the same group, and she had 3 kids, all of whom who had autism, and they were like 13, 9, and maybe 7. Anyway, they were a lot older. And that mom, I remember that mom telling the younger mom, hey, it gets better. Like, it's not easy, but I've been doing this a while now. And she had the benefit of seeing over time, literally over years and developmental stages, how it gets better. And so that's what I would say to parents. Hang in there, gets better, focus on the small wins, because they will be, if you can see them, I think it's reassuring to know that you're on the path for it getting better.
Absolutely. And one of the big parts on that path is finding your partners and finding, and taking the time, for yourself. I guess some people might say this isn't exactly self-care, but I would say that it could absolutely fit into that category. We all need our toolbox of ways that, we can really best reach and support our children and ourselves. And I'm really excited that this is available for families and that it is a focus for you and your team. So
yeah,
thank you.
Well, it's been great. We would welcome any families to come, and if you've got questions, hit us up about it. And if not, you want to try it out, we'll give you a way to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Peak.
Thank you, Lizzie.